How's it going, guys? Thanks for tuning into this Hockey Talk edition of the Phil Talk Sports Podcast, joined by Nick Gimbel. It's been over a year since Nick was last on the show because last Stanley Cup season, this room was not put together yet. So, Nick, I'm sorry we missed a season, your window that you normally come on the show, but I'm glad to have you back, man. It's great to see you.
Good to be back. Glad you got everything set back up, and at least one of the teams will have a chance to talk about from that last year's Cup run because they're back.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely a situation. It feels different being here in Florida because of there's Lightning fans, and we're going to talk about this later. The Panther fan uprising that has happened, even going back to last year, as you said, has been pretty interesting to talk about. So they are in a pretty good spot right now. The Florida Panthers will jump right into it. As of last night, at the time of this recording, are up 2-0 on Edmonton. Edmonton scored in the first period pretty early, actually. Florida tied it up in the second, took the lead in the mid-third, and then ran away with it late. Kind of makes the scoreline look a little more, dominant than the full game was, in my opinion. What do you think about that?
So, yeah, with the empty net goal at the end to make it 4-1, it was 3-1, but just defensive breakdowns for the Edmonton Oilers against the Florida Panthers. And it happened last series against the Dallas Stars, too. The Dallas Stars and the Florida Panthers play almost identical styles of games. It's defense first, and then they take advantage on transition games and turnovers and small mistakes that are made by the other team in their defensive zone. The game-winning goal, Evan Bouchard, the defender for Edmonton, failed a clearing attempt, instead passed it right on to the stick of Evan Rodriguez, and he takes the shot, put the puck on net. Good things happen. How many times have I said that before?
Right.
But it looked like the shot deflected off of the stick and then the padding of the Oiler trying to block the shot. And you could see Stuart Skinner's reaction as it buzzed past his ear hole of his goalie mask. He just kind of waved his hands in the air like, why are
Yeah.
we
What
making
can I
that
do?
pass?
Yeah.
And he was screened by his own defenseman. So Stuart Skinner was the question mark for the Oilers coming into this series because Sergei Bobrovsky is on another planet right now for the Florida Panthers. He signed that over $10 million a year contract with the Panthers, and not a single person on the hockey planet thought that that was a good contract for an aging goaltender. He's 35 years old right now, and he's playing like he's the best goaltender on the planet right now. So Stuart Skinner being the opposite of that for the Edmonton Oilers, that was the question mark coming in. He's played really, really well. He's just kind of gotten the bad end of the situation right now with plays like that the Oilers are making in their own defensive end.
Yeah. To backtrack just a minute, you talked about Rodriguez's goal. I don't know if it's because I'm older now, but these 8 o'clock starts are getting a little hard for me to stay up and watch these whole games. But the first one that he scored that took the lead for them, like you said, right in the top corner, that woke me up. I was up for the rest of the game. I was starting to nod off a little bit, came back. And, you mentioned Bobrovsky, how lights out he's been. It really reminds me of the run that the Lightning had a couple years ago when their goalie got hot, because that's the biggest trope in hockey, right? If your goalie's hot, anything can happen. And we've seen that thus far with them. They're up 2-0. They've defended home ice, but now the real work begins because, they always say 2-0 is the worst lead in hockey in a game. I don't know if that translates to a series. I think most teams would love to be up 2-0, but things will get interesting, obviously, when they move north of the border for the games in Edmonton. Do you – I assume this isn't you think this series is over yet. It's probably really just beginning now. We'll really see if they lay down or not in this game 3 in a couple days.
So a lot of people have the saying, like you said, a 2-goal lead is the worst lead in hockey. This was the year of comebacks in single game spurts throughout the regular season, and my favorite team, the Colorado Avalanche, were guilty of this, and they were guilty of it in the one game I got to go see in Denver. They were down by a couple of goals. They come back and they win. A lot of games were won in comeback fashion this year. I think third or second most in any season in NHL history were wins in comeback fashion at any point in the game, whether it be overtime, shootout, or a win in regulation. in a playoff series, every single game is its own little island. And this is the longest travel distance of any NHL Stanley Cup final in NHL playoff history. Over 2,500 air miles from Sunrise, Florida to Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So we have that extra day in between games for travel. So game 3 is not going to be at the time of this recording tomorrow night on Wednesday. Game 3 is going to be on Thursday. So Edmonton has that extra day to kind of regroup and gather themselves and kind of look themselves in the mirror and say what needs to be fixed.
I was wondering about that scheduling thing because in my head, I'm like, oh, this is great. We get a Stanley Cup game, then an NBA Finals game, and then it's just going to go back and forth. And then I realized that day off, but for the travel, that makes total sense. So I definitely appreciate you bringing that up.
Well, and the other thing we have to remember is the NHL has the combined TV rights as well as the NBA with ESPN or Disney Enterprises between ABC and ESPN and Turner Sports with TNT, True TV, and all that. This is the
Mm-hmm.
third year of that deal, and ESPN and TNT are alternating the Stanley Cup final hosting privileges.
Mm-hmm.
Year one, when it was Colorado and Tampa, was on ESPN and ABC. Last year on TNT with Vegas and Florida. And this year it's back to ESPN and ABC. So that's kind of coinciding and coexisting with the NBA finals being on ABC. And so ABC and ESPN kind of had that forethought to schedule the NBA and NHL finals on back to back or separate days. That way they're not competing with each other
Right.
on the same network. But going back to whether the series is done or not, I don't know because this goes back to the saying of the 2-goal lead is the worst lead in hockey.
Mm-hmm.
The other big saying in the playoffs is that a series is not over, or a series really hasn't begun until the home team loses a game.
Mm-hmm.
Once a game is won on the road, that's when a team is in trouble. So imagine Florida takes one of these two games in Edmonton. Now they go back to Sunrise for game 5 with a 3-1 series lead with a chance to win the cup on home ice. If the Florida Panthers end up winning a third game of this series, I don't think they're losing this series. I
Right.
think they're going to end up winning 4 games if they get to 3. They've been that close. They missed it last year. The big quote from Matthew Tkachuk was, "We're going to be back, and we're back." There's too many players on this Panthers team that got close and tasted the chance to lift the cup, and they missed that opportunity. I don't think they're going to miss that opportunity again if they get within 1 game of the cup.
I agree. After being in that situation last year, to know that you can have 3 games in the bag, only have to win one more, and like there may be more work to be done for that fourth game than there was for the other 3 games combined. If that were to hold true, what is the bigger story? The fact that a Canadian team still hasn't lifted a cup since, what is it, 1993? I think, was that the last one? Is the story that, or is it that somehow, some way, and this is going back to Tampa's back-to-back cups, that the best hockey programs are in the most southern parts of where the league operates? What do you think would be the bigger story?
I think it's that Canada can't get it done.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of goes hand in hand with both points. It's that the state of Florida is the state of hockey at the moment, and it goes back to the 2 teams in Florida going back and forth for the last 5 years,
Right.
representing the Eastern Conference in the Stanley Cup Finals. For 3 straight years, it was the Tampa Bay Lightning, and now for 2 years, it's been the Florida Panthers. And we talked about this when we were talking about the rise of the popularity for the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Mm-hmm.
With so many financial experts and financial advisors roaming around the world of pro sports right now, this shouldn't be as much of a factor as I think it actually is behind the scenes. Florida's a no state income tax or
Yes.
no state income tax state.
Right.
So if a player takes a $6 million a year deal as opposed in Florida as opposed to like a $7.2 million a year deal elsewhere where the state tax is higher or exists. That money can go farther in Florida. So
Yeah.
that's, and we have the climate, we have the success rate, we have the rising popularity, and you take players in Toronto right now with like Mitch Marner, who disappears when the playoffs come, and the media in the Canadian markets and Toronto especially, they are just down the throat of these players 24/7.
Mm.
A lot of people have speculated that Mitch Marner can go and win a cup somewhere where the media is not as prominent. And
Hmm.
the media is not as prominent in Florida.
Very
It's
forgiving. Yeah.
it's very not only forgiving, but it's just not really there that much.
Yeah.
Because in Tampa, you had at the time, you had Tom Brady with the Bucks. You
Yeah.
have the Tampa Bay Rays and their what was at the time their potential relocation. There was a time where the Tampa Bay Rays were maybe going to move to Orlando. And remember, the city of Orlando had plans to build an MLB park right next to SeaWorld and
Right.
Aquatica.
Right.
So you have so many other things going on in the sports world here in Florida that the Panthers and the Lightning, even with their success rates, they take a back seat to everything.
Hmm.
So players can kind of come down to Florida and just focus on the game and their families rather than trying to focus on what they say to the media after every single morning skate.
Right.
But what I will say is that the bigger storyline in the smaller world of sports is that if the Florida Panthers win, Corey Perry will now have lost 4 consecutive Stanley Cup final appearances. And this is with his 5th team. That's an NHL record.
That'll beat the. You may have the name of the player. I remember there was the guy that was on the Blues and then was back to back with the Lightning. So that takes it in the other direction there. But you mentioned the no state tax thing. That's definitely a factor. I think anyone that puts their head in the sand and thinks that doesn't come into the equation is just being silly. But like as a Magic fan, right? People always bring that up when somebody signs for less money with the Heat. For whatever reason, people don't go that route with the Magic, even though they have all those same opportunities. So at the end of the day, it still has to be a good organization. And when both these teams, like you said, over the past 5 years have made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, representing a whole half of the league coming from the same state, it's clear that both of these organizations are top notch. There was a point where the Lightning were considered the best sports organization in the country. Like that was a thing on like Time Magazine or whatever. So what I've been most surprised about as we shift to our next thing, we can talk more about the cup if we want to in a minute, when the Lightning kind of captured the hearts of Florida because they're winners. That's what made it happen, right? Back in '04, it was a fun time. The fact that it came up again in a time where people had no choice but to sit in their home and watch this greatness. I thought the state of Florida would be blue completely, right? Not a political statement, just like in the sense of the Lightning, but how the Panthers have really like the population of people in Florida that watch hockey, I thought it would be 70-30, 90-10. It's easily 50-50 now. And I appreciate the fact that you uh, mentioned that they are in Sunrise, Florida, not in Miami, like people try to claim. So I appreciate that on your end. I don't know if it's just the excellence. They are close enough to South Florida that they can view them as like this half of the state likes them. Obviously, everybody loves a winner, but in a state like Florida, they can have transient people, a transient fan base. If one team gets good, you usually don't naturally get that other team's fan base risen the way it is. So to really see the Panthers do this over the same 5 years that the Lightning were winning cups at the same time while they were building their roster is I don't know that I've seen anything like this in Florida or anywhere else.
So, well, I say Sunrise because I was fortunate enough to attend an Avalanche game in Sunrise.
Hmm.
So I have a friend who lives down in the Miami Fort Lauderdale area, and she works at a restaurant in downtown Miami. And we took a trip up to Fort Lauderdale, and it was like 45 minutes away because of traffic.
Right.
And then Sunrise is directly west, and the arena is kind of just next to a mall. It's
Hmm.
not really in a populated area. It's just kind of in an open field in a mall area.
Hmm.
So I think that helps and hurts at the same time. Like hockey, I don't think would work in downtown Miami. or
Agreed.
downtown Fort Lauderdale.
Mhm.
It would kind of be like trying to put a minor league baseball team in St. Augustine, Florida.
Yeah, that'd be rough.
Like the Daytona Tortugas are in a good spot. They're in the heart of the tourist district, but close enough for locals.
Yeah.
I still think a minor league baseball team would work wonders in Orlando, just
Yeah.
because of the heavy Hispanic demographic there, and
Mhm.
the I mean, Spanish is like the most spoken language in the theme park world right now.
Mhm.
So I think a minor league, it's like the placement of everything is so key. So
What is
kind of
interesting
being
about that, not to cut you off real quick,
oh, you're good.
before we get back on track with hockey, they did attempt one in the Orlando area. They had the Florida Fire Frogs, which were located with the Atlanta Braves, and they were playing. I think this is where they messed up. They were playing in the Wild World of Sports, which like the locals know how to get there, but I don't think casuals are gonna go to the theme park area,
Right.
brave that traffic to go to something that's supposed to be accessible. So I
Yeah.
think that was the issue. Like the year I started working for the Tugas was the first year of the Fire Frogs, and they only lasted 2 seasons. And by the start of the second season, they knew they weren't coming back. So it was a quickly failed experiment. But like you said, location is everything. I think if they picked a different spot in Orlando, I'm not saying play at UCF because they have a state of the art facility, but even like a Rollins College type situation because they
Yeah.
play the summer league games there. I agree. I think it could totally work. But location is everything. You look at Inter Miami; they have Miami on their chest, but they play in Fort Lauderdale. And prior to Messi, like those attendance numbers were hideous. So yeah, location might be a big part of it. They're smart to. I think people miss the Florida Marlins days before they claimed Miami. I think a little bit of that pulls into that. You can live in Jacksonville, and because it's not a Miami team, it says Florida. It's like, well, I live in Florida. There's no reason I don't go to Tampa all the time, but I live in Florida. So I think the naming. I think I don't want to oversell it, but I think it has more to do with it than people realize.
Well, and that was a thought that actually just popped into my head at the same time too, is that you have the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers. So a casual fan who lives in Jacksonville now, and like the ECHL in the state of Florida is ridiculous right
Yes.
now.
Yes.
The Florida Everblades just won their third straight Kelly Cup.
Yep.
So the state of Florida is full of champions in hockey right now, and we'll get to that with college hockey later in a second too.
Right. Right.
But let let's say that a casual fan who goes to a Jacksonville Iceman game and it's their first hockey game ever, because the ECHL tickets are only like 12 to 15 bucks a pop, so it's much more easily accessible for a new fan.
Right.
They don't want to follow the New York Rangers because they've never lived in New York. So they
Yeah.
start researching hockey in the state of Florida. Well, I don't live in Tampa, so I don't want to support Tampa. But this Florida Panthers team, it's just Florida. So I'll
Yeah.
start following them. And the Florida Panthers play a very specific style of hockey that is very, very fun to watch. They are just a bunch of big old bullies.
Hmm.
Matthew Tkachuk, Sam Bennett, all of them are just downright nasty to play against. I've played against guys that are just not fun to play against, and it really plays a factor in eyes on the sport, because you look at the main hockey highlights that people find. It's the fights, it's the scrums, it's the
Hmm.
big hits. And the Florida Panthers are playing that style of play in a defensive system that does not allow for opposing teams to get scoring chances or to make plays. Connor McDavid has 1 point in this series because the Edmonton Oilers only have one goal in this series because Sergei Bobrovsky is superhuman at the moment. But it's the same reason that Edmonton didn't get a lot of scoring chances against Dallas, because I've already said this before, but Dallas and Florida play the exact same style of play. It's just heavy defensive structure, hard forechecking, big hits, and I don't, for those that have seen Ted Lasso, it's learning to be a prick when it is appropriate.
Right.
This series hasn't had a lot of nasty after the whistle scrums because Florida's been winning. It's not appropriate for them to start ruffling feathers when Edmonton is already ruffled mentally. Once Edmonton gets a lead, especially in Edmonton, because I think they will in game 3 or game 4 or both, once the Edmonton Oilers get a 1-2 or even a 3-goal lead, that's when you're going to see Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett just start coming into every single net front battle, cross check, slash, try to start a scrum after every single whistle.
Yeah, I mean it's worked so far, and that makes a lot of sense. That they had a small deficit in game two, but they have not had a reason, like you said, to turn that switch on. To be a prick when the Jamie Tart scenario, right? That whole deal. So that would explain it a lot. To last touch on the branding thing, like we were talking about too, the Everglades that won. I'm a Solar Bears guy, so like I've always been familiar with them because they beat Orlando a lot. Because as you said, 4 straight cups or whatever it was. I didn't even know where exactly they were located. I just knew they were in Florida somewhere because you got Orlando, you got the Jacksonville with Iceman, right, and then them. So very similar. If you're just trying to get involved in it, and it's like this is probably the closest team to me, it makes perfect sense. And it's close enough that people in Miami can go. It's close enough that if you are in Jacksonville, may be a bit of a stretch, but like if you're really into it in Orlando, like you can basically get to Sunrise in the time it would take you to get to Tampa if you
Right.
take the right routes. So really, it's just as accessible as any other team in the state would be, without the branding of like, because that was always my thing. Like I try to follow Tampa a bit now, and I really had the mental thing of like I follow pro Orlando everything, and if there is a Tampa team in said league, that's usually the biggest rival. So it's hard for me to like boo Tampa in this sport, this sport, this sport, and then call my team in another sport. What's helped is the Orlando Solar Bears affiliation with them. So that has like eased my mind. And I'm probably overthinking it. I don't think a lot of people look at it that way, but I try to be consistent with things. It's hard to boo the crap out of Chicago. You can't boo the Bears and be a Cubs fan, in my opinion. Like that's just how that sort of stuff should work. So it's made it a little easier to follow them and cheer for them. But back to the Panthers because they're the team in the spotlight here. What do you think it would mean to get as close as they did last year and to pull it off? Very similar to the Lightning, had that disastrous 2019 to come back. Granted, it was in the bubble, but to win in 2020. Um, I remember asking you this. We didn't get to do this last year, so when the Lightning won the second one, what what will this team look like the year following? Is this something they can keep rolling? Is this the pinnacle of something, or is it just the start of something?
So the NHL is full of parity at the moment, even though it doesn't really seem like it in the Eastern Conference because the Lightning and the Panthers have made it to 5 straight Stanley Cup finals. But the Lightning are the only team to repeat since the Pittsburgh Penguins back in the 2016-2017, and there's been no three-peats. So teams can make it back, but to win it is just a ridiculous feat once, let alone twice, and almost impossible a third time.
Mm,
The salary cap, which we'll talk about more in the offseason, is rising to 88 million, an extra 4.5 million per team almost. So
yeah,
contracts like the long-term Matthew Tkachuk contract for the Florida Panthers. He came in last season and he is the identity of the Florida Panthers. Anybody can walk out onto the ice and throw a hit and when it is appropriate be a prick and throw the other team off their game. It's ridiculously hard to score a goal in the NHL. Ask the Edmonton Oilers through 2 games.
right.
It's ridiculously hard to score a goal in the NHL. But anybody on that team, third or fourth line depth players, make their money by walking out onto the ice, blocking shots, making hits, and just getting the puck out of the defensive zone for checking on the other end. That is the identity that the Florida Panthers bought when they traded for and signed for Matthew Tkachuk. As long as he is a Florida Panther, I think the Panthers are going to be definitely in the playoffs year after year and cup contenders year after year if they keep rotating in the right players. Like the addition of Sam Bennett, he has just latched on to the side of Matthew Tkachuk and they play exact same ways. And then
Mm,
you get the additions of Evan Rodriguez, scored 2 goals last night He was on the Avalanche last year, so I got to watch him play. He's a great depth forward. He's not necessarily known for his scoring. He's just a smart player. And, he puts the puck on net and goes to the net for a deflection. Those are his two goals. They're not flashy goals. He's just putting himself in an area to be successful. And that's all you can ask for from those depth players is play in the offensive zone and make the right play after that.
You touched on the salary cap thing. We're going to go in detail with that when I have you on after the cup. But the amount it's going up, what you said, it's around $5 million. Just to put it into perspective for people like me that wouldn't know, that 5 million, is that a whole nother quality player? Is that how much would you say that's going to aid teams? Just in a quick sentence or two, because we'll deep dive it next time.
I would say that's the ability to re-sign one or two of your top quality players.
Gotcha.
So right now, Nathan McKinnon was the highest paid player in the NHL. Now he's the second, I believe, behind Austin Matthews. But it was somewhere in the realm of 12 million a year. So a Nathan McKinnon caliber player at 12 million a year, and I think Cale Makar is making around 9 million a year. So
Okay.
these higher echelon players are going to start asking for closer to 13 or 14 million, but that's not going to get these teams any closer to the cup because what it's going to take is what's happening in Florida and what happened in Boston for years, taking less so that more players are willing to sign with that team because they have that extra 4.5 million in cap space. So you can go out and spend 3 or 4 million on a bottom six quality player rather than focusing on trying to build up a prospect that may not be ready for the NHL.
Mm. I appreciate you breaking that down because you hear the number, but it's like, what does that number really mean? So I appreciate you putting that in perspective for guys like me that may not know. So we're at the, first, I guess the third point of the Stanley Cup. Obviously, we go to Edmonton tomorrow, and we'll be back on with Nick when the series wraps up to discuss the winner and everything like that. Before we get out of it here today, we're going to talk about something that's kind of close to both of our hearts. Nick used to work in College Hockey South, and I believe it had a different name when you were there. And my first hockey game of any level was UCF and Emory Riddle. And Emory Riddle, I say it to anybody who will listen, has an incredible atmosphere for a school that you wouldn't think would for any sport, and they have latched on to this hockey team. The College Hockey South branding has turned it. You told me this may or may not be true, but the way they spin it, they've kind of pulled it from a club level to a D3 level, and then there are teams that have participated in it previously, like your Florida Gators, and I think I saw Tennessee even, that are clamoring for a D1 status. So, what does that mean for teams like the Gators in Tennessee, and what does that mean for College Hockey South? Is that a good thing for them? Is that going to hurt them long term? Where do you see that working for them moving forward?
So when I played junior hockey from 2013 to 2016, it was all about NCAA commitments. That's all the organizations wanted in terms of advancement was how many players can you get to the NCAA D1 and D3 ranks.
Hmm.
It was kind of frowned upon to say, "Oh, I'm going to go play in the American Collegiate Hockey Association or the ACHA, which is club level hockey." Club hockey is not it's exactly what it is. It's a club event or a club activity for the school. So you don't really have the proper branding or the finances that go along with being an NCAA program. There's no scholarships, it's pay to play. The schools don't provide the funding, so everything comes from boosters or from the players or from fundraising events. Club hockey is where the people who love the game play because that's what you have to do in order to play. You have to
Mhm.
have an immense love for the game and a desire to play for an extra 1 to 5 years at the club level. A couple of years ago, the ACHA kind of split in two, and there was a separate division. The Collegiate Hockey Federation kind of split away from the ACHA and USA Hockey and created their own club hockey system because the ACHA had over 170 programs. That's just way too many, and teams felt that they weren't getting a good look for national attention and for the national championship. Now you have what is now the Collegiate Hockey Federation has now been changed into the AAU. The American Athletic Union now has these club hockey teams, and they've created their own Division One, Division Two, and Division Three system.
Hmm.
Division One didn't exist until last year. There was just Division Two and Division Three. Now you have Division One, Division Two, and Division Three across all of the different regions of the country. And College Hockey South, in a lack of a better term, is the SEC and the ACC combined into
Right.
one College Hockey South. And you've got the Florida Gators, you have the Tennessee Vols, you have Georgia Tech, Alabama, and teams like the University of Tampa. The University of Tampa, who does not have a big athletics program, has probably the best college hockey program in the state of Florida.
I
They're
believe
not
they
a
won it
national
last year,
champion.
didn't they?
I think they won it last year, but this past year, the University of Tampa wasn't even in the finals.
Hmm.
They, for whatever reason, got ousted towards the end because other teams are starting to catch up. But this separation between the ACHA and what is now AAU college hockey has allowed for the popularity and acceptance of club hockey being played by these higher echelon juniors players that won't necessarily pursue a professional career in hockey. They just want to get a quality education, quality campus life, and play a high level of hockey. I've been on the ice with these players as an official. I've watched the game from above in a broadcaster booth. I've watched from behind the bench as a coach. These players love the game more than anyone I've ever been around. And those players at the Division 1 and Division 2 levels, they can move. They are fast, they're smart, they know how to play the game, and it's great hockey. And almost all the time it's free. I think Embry Riddle admission was $5 a game.
Yep. Yep.
And like you said, it's one of if you can think of a college like Penn State or Michigan or Ohio State, think of their student section at that hockey game, and then just that is all the fans at a club hockey game is just the student section. It is
Like
crazy.
I've been to the ice rink in Daytona a million times since I was a kid, and to go in there for the first time that wasn't a free skate for something like this, I'm like, they turned this place into a barn. Like it is rocking. Like I was so surprised. I just thought we were gonna go because they have that bar that oversees it too. I'm like, we'll go sit at the bar, watch this game, and just enjoy it. And it just like UCF didn't win, and I didn't even care. It was just such a great atmosphere, and I'm sure there's others spattered across. Like from what I see at UCF and stuff, same idea. Really, it's like if you like hockey and don't have a team to have a rooting interest, like if you went to Florida, if you went to Miami, if you went to Tennessee, it could be you're in. Like it's kind of what got me into watching a lot more because I had a rooting interest from the get go. So what I also hear you say is all these divisions are kind of under the same umbrella. So a team like Florida or Tennessee moving up doesn't necessarily hurt the teams below. It makes it more even, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and there's only now 7 with the addition of the University of Florida and the University of Tennessee. There's now only 7 teams at the Division 1 level within the College Hockey South Conference in all of AAU Division 1. So those Division 1 teams are still playing the Division 2 teams.
Mm.
So the the caliber of teams is so close to one another between the D1 and D2 levels. Uh, and it's really funny how College Hockey South did their end of season tournament. They waited until after nationals to do their conference tournament. But the Florida Gators won the Division Two national championship, and then they went on to beat the University of South Carolina, who were Division One champions in the College Hockey South Conference Championship.
Mm.
So that just shows you how close these programs are. And a lot of these D1 and D2 programs are the programs that house the D3 programs. Like the University of Tampa has all three programs just because everybody wants to go to school at the University of Tampa.
Right.
Great campus life, not a lot of on-campus sports, but you have the pro sports in the area. You have the climate of Western Florida, and it's just a draw for these players now to have the overall acceptance that club hockey is. John Buccigross, club hockey is college hockey, is like his motto.
Right.
The ESPN broadcaster just touting club hockey right now. That's what the sport needs, is the ability for these southern programs to have these good teams, put eyes of the nation on these programs, so that some of the players playing in the Northeast playing juniors, they say, "Oh, I grew up watching college football. I want to go see the Miami Hurricanes.
Right.
They won the D3 national championship." College Hockey South did a sweep at the AAU Nationals. University of Miami won D3, Florida Gators won D2, and the University of South Carolina in College Hockey South, but not in Florida, won D1.
Yeah.
And to touch on it even further, the University of Florida beat Florida Atlantic University in the championship game. The University of Miami beat Florida Southern in the championship game. These are national championship games, not state championship games, national championship games. Two of the three were Florida only games.
Yeah.
That kind of says it all right there, that these Florida teams are just powering through, making their way, and one of these Florida teams is going to win the national championship.
Yeah. And I remember seeing there was, I don't know if it was labeled as a state tournament, but it essentially was. And I saw UCF, USF, Tampa, and Miami went and played at like a neutral site little round robin thing. And I just couldn't take my eyes off it. You know, they were streaming it luckily. But I just wanted to do a few minutes on this because like seeing this grow so organically, like they basically invented a level that didn't exist, 5-10 years ago for these locations. Because if you're not Michigan or Penn State or, you know, New Hampshire or Vermont, there is no quote unquote big time college hockey. So to invent that out of thin air, I think deserves to be spotlighted and celebrated because everything they're doing so far, I think, is fantastic.
Well, and all of this is on the backs of the players that played in the 2000s and early 2010s. The Florida Gators started operating their club hockey team in 1996. So these teams didn't come out of thin air, but the
structure
I
kind of
think,
did.
yeah, the structure, and it was frowned upon at the moment, the separation from the ACHA and USA Hockey. But being able to, like you said, kind of create something out of thin air and take these teams in the southern states and the southern conferences, put them against each other, show that they have the talent to compete with the best in the country. It's like you said, it's really impressive and really fun to see. And I've said for a couple of years now, the NCAA needs to take notice. Can you imagine an NCAA Division I SEC hockey conference? Just go look at some of the uniforms. I on my computer screen above my camera right now, I have the College Hockey South Twitter X now. They have the logo of the Division II University of Florida Gator Championship. The three jerseys that are being portrayed in this picture are some of the best jerseys I've ever seen, period.
UCF had a little of that too, because like they use the logo, but they kind of have the freedom to expand on it because it's not
And that's
a
so
one-to-one deal.
rare.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that goes back to not having the funding, not having the backing of the school like an NCAA program has. As a club activity, I would say 90% of the schools don't have the ability to use their school's branding. UCF is so lucky to
Yeah.
be able to use their actual night helmet. They got they got brand new jerseys this year because
They
UCF
changed the
changed
logo.
their
Yeah.
Big 12 because they
Yeah.
changed their logo. The Florida Gators, they're able to use the regular Gator logo, but if they sell their merch, like they sell jerseys online, they can't sell the Gator head logo. They
Yeah.
have to sell the jerseys that just say Florida or Gators on the front.
I don't think UCF can sell the only thing they can sell as like a raffle type thing, they sell the game worn jerseys at the end of the year. That's the only
Mhm.
way you get one that has the actual logo on it.
So I just dream one day of an NCAA D1 SEC conference and an ACC conference because it has some of the best rivalries too. The University of South Carolina Gamecocks, the Division One champions, every single year they have their own Palmetto Bowl against Clemson.
Mhm.
They play at Bon Secours Wellness Arena in Greenville, where the Swamp Rabbits play just outside of Clemson. They fill like 300, 400, 500 seats
Yeah.
because it's just such a rivalry game. And you look a couple of years ago when the Carolina Hurricanes hosted the Winter Classic or the Stadium Series game, one of the two. They had the excuse me, they had the outdoor stadium
Right.
at NC State being used for that outdoor game. NC State and UNC got to play a club hockey game on that rink, and it was free admission.
Mhm.
The teams just said, "We're having this opportunity to play. Come out and see us."
Right.
They filled the lower bowl, dude. They
It's
had to
crazy.
they had to open the upper bowl.
That's
There were
awesome.
there were hundreds of thousands of people at a club hockey game. It's the most attended club hockey game ever, and it it's just amazing to see and proves that hockey works in the South. You have the Florida Everblades winning 3 straight in Estero, Florida. You have the Tampa Bay Lightning and Florida Panthers successful on their ends of the state. Hockey is on a rise, and the NCAA needs to take advantage of it within the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
It's possible to create something out of thin air. These
And it
these players at the club hockey level will not play at the NCAA D1 level. But I can guarantee that if the University of Florida, let's say University of South Carolina, let's say not necessarily Miami, um, let's say Alabama for
Mhm.
sure. You
Yeah.
say Alabama, South Carolina, Florida, Clemson, NC State. Let's start with those 5 where
Yeah.
they have heavy, heavy sporting programs. They're going to get some recruits in a transfer portal situation from Michigan or from Vermont because the campus life, the climate. These players live in a 40-degree ice rink for their entire life.
Right.
To be able to walk outside in the Florida heat and warm up and go train on a beach or on a football field like that, it would just be a booming scene in the world of the NCAA.
Because it's not even that hockey works in Florida. It's not that simple. It's that it works at every level. You just laid
Yes.
out at every level. So that is, like you said, they need to take notice because that college hockey South, they put the train on the track. It's up to them to steer it in the right direction moving forward. But definitely something, like I said, I'm glad we could spotlight because seeing I've only been aware of it this maybe year 4 for me, and just to see what they've done in that short amount of time. And granted, that was a long time coming from probably other things that were building up. Is great to see.
And
But
it's not just these big programs.
right,
Embry-Riddle, University
yes,
of
Embry
Tampa,
Riddle is crazy.
Florida
Tampa,
Southern. If you went to a college that if you went to a 4-year college, try to find your school's club hockey team.
yeah, you'd be
Because they
surprised how many
exist.
people don't know. Like, I had a coworker say, like, "Man, wouldn't it be cool if Miami had hockey?" And I'm like, "Dude, they do," and he
Yeah,
was blown away.
they're
So I
national
think, yeah,
champions.
yes, that is definitely the note to take away. If you have a school, even a relatively smaller school that you went to, you may be surprised to learn that they have a club hockey team that you can follow.
And in today's internet age, a lot of them have live streaming of their games,
Yep.
and it's on YouTube or I think Tampa uses Black Dog Hockey,
Hmm.
but Embry Riddle uses YouTube. The
Yep.
University of Florida uses YouTube, and The Florida Gators are lucky that they have their esteemed sports broadcasting programs
Mhm.
and their journalism programs. They have student-run radio stations and radio networks bringing these kids out to Jacksonville, I might add.
Yeah.
That's another thing to touch on with the Florida Gators, especially. There's no ice rink in Gainesville.
Right. UCF
They
plays a neat
travel
one.
an hour and a half to Jacksonville, to the
Mhm.
closest ice rink.
Yeah.
That's the love of the game that I'm talking
Right.
about. There's
Yeah. You,
no there's no ice rink within an hour of Gainesville, so they travel to Jacksonville to play their home games for their practices.
yeah.
So University of Central Florida is lucky that they have the RDV Sportsplex probably 20-ish minutes away from campus.
Right. And it's important to note too, if you ever look for these games, because sometimes they're at these public arenas, these games will start at 9, 10, sometimes 11 o'clock at night. And that is, as you've already said multiple times, that is the love of the game for sure.
The University of Kentucky, they're still in the ACHA, but their in-state rival, the Louisville Cardinals, they have club hockey teams.
Yeah.
They play a Midnight Madness game,
Love it.
and they bring out like 600 people, and it's kind of set up. I don't know if you've ever been to RDV, where
Mm.
they have the Olympic rink has the stands.
Yeah.
So it's kind of built like that, where it's like 8 to 9 rows of bleachers on one side of the rink, completely packed for a midnight puck drop, their
Yeah.
Midnight Madness game against their in-state rival. And that game goes until 2:33 in the morning,
Mm.
and it's just a time. Please find, if you have a 4-year college in your area, they will have a club hockey team, or they will have something to do in the world of hockey.
Yeah. That's the perfect exclamation point to wrap this one up. Panthers up 2-0 in the Stanley Cup final. We'll be back next week with the finals of it, and we're going to talk a few other things. NHL players now allowed in the Olympics. We're going to deep dive more into the salary cap and the Four Nations Cup, which I will admit at the moment I know nothing about, so I need time to do some research on it. Other than that, Nick, it was a year in the making, but it's great to have you back. And we have another project that we've kind of talked about before we got on the air here. So we might see Nick for a third video this year too, which would be great. So thank you again, man. Appreciate you being here. And everyone else, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Take care.